We have Amy here, and Amy has been very patient and she is awesome. So I want to go ahead and let her get started. But I want to give a little introduction to Amy. I am a member of the Editorial Freelancers Association. As many of you know, I'm a developmental editor, and the EFA has been instrumental in me being confident that my skill set was where it needed to be to actually provide, services for money, even though I was being pushed by publishers that I knew them directly and everything like that. And the EFA was just this wonderful home for me. And Amy has been running the EFA and being the coordinator or the co-coordinator for years and years. And so when I realized that there was a local group and I got to come and see all these different editors who are word nerds in the same way that I'm a word nerd, but from totally different directions or totally different, in technology, or they're in the oil business, but it's the same kind of nerd brain. It was amazing. So I was so happy to find that home. And Amy's been running that group again for years. But a little bit more about her background. Amy's been an editor for over 13 years. She runs editoramy.com. She's got a BA in mass communication and a certificate in editing, and she just completed her master's degree in publishing. So this lady knows a lot, if I needed to spell that out for you. She's amazing. I've known her for years, and I'm so happy that she's come just to talk to us today. So without further ado, Amy, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Okay. Hi. First, I want to thank y'all for having me here. I'm really excited to do this presentation for y'all, and I'm happy to work with Shannon anytime. So as you can see, this presentation is called Working with an Editor. It is about preparing to work with and then later actually working with an editor. Primarily a freelance editor, but there will be some mentions to in-house traditional publishing editors as well. So let's go ahead and get started. Here we go. So this might seem kind of obvious, but let's go ahead and lay out what an editor actually does. So they thoroughly check grammar, spelling, punctuation, style, things like that. It really goes beyond that of what you may have learned in an English class. I've heard a lot of people compare editors with English teachers, and to me, they're honestly very different. In my opinion, English teachers spend a lot more time on literature, as in teaching literature and dissecting it. And of course, editors deal with correcting the issues with language itself. So also, an editor balances a writer's desires with the publisher's standards and the reader's expectations, making a book its best version. Oh, and I wanted to add, I will gladly email any of y'all this PowerPoint presentation if you would like, in case you want to reference it later. So I guess just let me know at the end if any of y'all would like to have this emailed, and I will gladly do that. Additionally, an editor polishes and refines work ready for editing. They notice when and where elements don't fit, and they see when something is missing, and very importantly, they know how to fix it. Finally, they bring to a manuscript the knowledge and technique that a writer might not have, might not know how to use, or might not be able to see the need for in his or her own work. A lot of times writers they're a little too close to their own work, and so a lot of errors can slip by that way. And so it's really important to have that extra set of eyes on your own work. This is just a fun little graphic that I found about whether you need an editor. So on the left, it starts with, are there words? Yes or no. If there are no words in your story, well, you might want to consider adding words. If there are words, then yes, you need an editor, and so on and so on. So I thought that was pretty cool. All right, let's dive into the different types of editing. First, we have developmental editing. This is the big picture, deep kind of editing. Sometimes it's called substantive or content editing. The differences between substantive and developmental, they are a little bit different, but there are also overlaps. So for here, we'll just call them essentially the same thing. With developmental editing in fiction, the editor will repair issues with and then enhance the plot, character development, and believability, dialogue, narration, flow, etc. The editor will also address story holes, and as they are reading the story, ask questions that they think readers would ask. And with nonfiction books, the developmental editor focuses more on structure and the organization of content, flow, voice, and missing or incomplete information. Next, we have copy editing. This one is my favorite. This is the standard but very detailed kind of editing that every type of writing needs. The errors corrected are mechanical in nature, and they include grammar, spelling, punctuation, style, consistency, syntax, and capitalization. This is what most people think of when they think of editing. Next, we have proofreading. This is the final check. So this comes after all other types of editing have been done. The completed product is compared against the editor's corrections to make sure everything matches, and any remaining mechanical errors should be caught and corrected. Also, the layout, alignment, and spacing are reviewed. So the proofreader is the final pair of eyes before a book goes to print, basically. Here are just a couple of examples of what editing can do for wording. So I'll just read this aloud. This is before copy editing. It says, "It stopped raining and let the sun's light through. Abby put down the New York Times, put on her running shoes, and grabbed her iPod. Eye of the Tiger came on, an oldie but goodie, as she headed out for her morning run." Now, you can probably see several errors in there. Now let's look at it after editing. You can see that raining was misspelled up here. That got corrected. The first sentence got reworded a little so it flows better. Other things like the New York Times should actually be italicized instead of put in quotation marks. Songs should be in quotation marks. And then finally, she was headed out for her morning run, as in AM run, not morning, as in mourning the death of someone. That would be kind of an embarrassing mistake to let pass. So here you can see the second one, the second example looks a lot cleaner. All right, here are some things about a good editor. So a good editor preserves each author's unique voice. Typically, copy edits 4 to 10 pages, double-spaced, per hour, and developmentally edits 1 to 5 per hour. This might seem slow compared to actually reading pages, but and sometimes this seems to be a misconception with some new authors. They think that an editor should be able to edit about as fast as they read, but that's not the case at all, because if you really think about it, an editor has to look at every single letter down to, the punctuation marks, the spacing, everything. So, proper editing can actually take a while, but these are the most common rates. Also, a good editor knows at least one style guide very well. A style guide is a manual that answers a lot of writing related questions. It goes over how to properly style and format documents. It answers a lot of questions that editors have as they edit books. And so this helps, a style guide keeps documents consistent throughout. They're really good to have. And there are several of them in circulation. And so a good editor should know at least one very well. A good editor also tells the truth nicely, never belittlingly. So a good editor really should not sugarcoat things, but of course they should be polite. You know, you don't want to deal with someone who's rude, obviously. Additionally, a good editor only enhances, never takes away from a writer's work. Also knows what a style sheet is and will give you one if requested. Now, a style sheet is a little different from a style guide. And here soon I will show you an example of a style sheet. It's basically a short document that is created for a particular book. So it'll have the spelling of certain words. It'll have certain grammar, punctuation, etc. rules in it, and sometimes goes over issues that the editor noticed in the book, just for the writer to have so they can learn, and in case they ever want to reference anything specific from that style sheet, they will always have it. Finally, a good editor can explain why any correction or suggestion was made. So if you're ever unsure of why an editor made a specific correction, don't be afraid to ask. We should be able to always explain it and be happy to do so. All right, next, an editor is not a critic, a beta reader, a literary agent, a co-author or ghostwriter, or an English teacher. All right, next, the pedigree of a good editor. Just some things to keep in mind as you're seeking out an editor. So a good editor ideally will have at least a bachelor's degree in something like communication, journalism, or English. Also have experience working under other editors before branching out on his or her own, such as working somewhere in-house, working for a company, working with other editors so that they can really learn and grow before they start their own business. So also preferably have years of formal training, preferably under a mentor for part of it. I feel really lucky I was able to have a couple of mentors in my early days as an editor, and that really helped me out, I feel like. A bonus would be continued education, like a certificate in editing from a recognized university or program. There are several really good editing programs out there, and so really props to your editor if they have something like that. Also, involvement in editors or writers communities, like memberships with editing or writing societies and writers groups. So like this group, for example, or also the Editorial Freelancers Association, the American Copy Editors Society. There's several of them that are good. So it's really good if your editor has some kind of involvement in something like that. And just for fun, 1,000 language-related reference books. I feel like I have about this many, and they just keep piling up. But they're fun to read. All right. Let's see. Next, how it starts, how the editing process starts. So an author will contact the editor with a request and any questions. Next, the editor will review the author's request, answer questions, and possibly ask to evaluate part of the author's work. I always do this before I offer an estimate, a pricing estimate to an author. I always ask to review part of their work first. That way you get a feel for their writing style and see what kinds of issues, might jump out. To me, that's a really important step. Next, the editor and the author confer. If they choose to move forward, cost plus time frame of the project are determined. And the editor may send a letter of agreement or a contract, basically, regarding services, costs and payments, and a timeline. Not every editor does this, of course, but I do feel it's important, especially for larger projects like novels. That way it protects both the editor and the author. And the author may send an NDA or non-disclosure agreement for the editor to sign. And I've signed several of these in the past. I have no problem signing them either. So if you have an NDA and you request an editor to sign it and they balk, I would take that as a bad sign. There's really no reason why they, should be hesitant to sign an NDA. As long as
May I add one thing?
Yeah, sure.
Presuming the NDA isn't part of your contract already, just because some editors, myself included, the NDA is included. It's one of the sections of my contract that I'm not going to talk about your book unless you want me to, and you told me explicitly to. So,
yeah, exactly.
But something's in there for privacy, for sure.
Yes, exactly. And then lastly, the editing process can begin. All right, the typical editing process, and I just liked this comic right here. So the first pass, the editor will go through the book the first time, and depending on what type of editing you're having done, the editor will do that and then send it back to the author for review. And then this next step is optional. I do like to do it though, because a lot of times I will request little rewrites here and there, or sometimes major rewrites depending on the book. And this revision gives the author a chance to add new changes to the book, and this way they get edited as well. And so I always factor in one revision into the cost when I edit a book. And then reuniting, the author gets their baby back, basically their pristine, beautiful book back. Okay, next, let's talk about in-house versus indie editing. So there are, typically there are two main avenues that an author can choose to go down if they want to publish a book. They can pursue traditional publishing, or they can self-publish. So if you pursue traditional publishing, think Penguin Random House, companies like that. First, you will need a literary agent, and then that agent will pitch your manuscript to various publishing companies. You never want to send an unsolicited manuscript to really any publishing company. A few will accept them, but it's a good idea to check with their website first, because most will say they will not accept unsolicited manuscripts. This is where the literary agent comes in and will do that for you. So if accepted, your book will then land on the desk of an acquisitions editor. And they sometimes do the first round of light editing. And then that person, the acquisitions editor, will pitch the book to their publishing company. If it's approved, it'll go to either an in-house production editor or to a freelance or indie editor whom the publisher will choose. I've seen more and more lately, even the big name publishing companies are using freelancers, not in-house editors, to do the main editing. So you might end up working with a freelancer no matter which route you take. If you choose to self-publish, you will only deal with an indie editor or two of your choosing. And I say or two because if you get multiple types of editing done, you may want to get, say, one editor for developmental editing and one editor for copy editing. Some editors recommend doing so instead of having just one person work on everything. Many authors seeking traditional publishing will still choose to hire an indie editor or two first. Now, why? Because an acquisitions editor may be more likely to go to bat for your book if it's already in good condition. So acquisitions editors, like many editors, are stretched pretty thin. So they typically don't have the time to do a real in-depth editing of every book that lands on their desk. So if a book is completely unedited when they get it and it's filled with errors, it'll be a harder sell to the publishing company. So that's why it can be a good idea, no matter what your route, to go ahead and seek out a freelance editor first. All right, let's talk money. So something very important to keep in mind, you get what you pay for. That's pretty true across the board. You know, we all like a good deal, but be wary of editors whose prices are a lot lower than others. There are a lot of amateurs out there, and really some people who should not even be calling themselves editors, honestly, who will charge ridiculously low rates to try to be greedy, basically, and grab all the clients. Just an FYI, the least to most expensive types of editing are generally proofreading and then copy editing and then developmental editing. All right, actual costs. Usually, not always, but the going rate is about $30 to $50 per hour, or 1 cent to 4 cents per word. It really depends on the type of editing you've requested, how many years of experience the editor has, you know, whether they're just starting out or they're seasoned. The Editorial Freelancers Association, they actually have a really good rates chart on their website. And I can find that for y'all if anyone wants me to. They list all kinds of rates for various editorial services. Again, that's the Editorial Freelancers Association. They have a rates chart on their website, but this is basically what it says. Also, something to keep in mind, discounts, packages, and free sample edits do exist. So what I like to do, if someone books, say, a developmental edit and a proofreading with me, you know, multiple services, I will offer them a discount. And sometimes I offer new client discounts as well. There's a little sentence somewhere hidden, kind of not really hidden, but somewhere in the depths of my website that mentions that I offer new client discounts. And so if someone mentions that to me, I will of course give them a discount. And some editors offer free sample edits. Most editors will do a sample edit regardless, and I think this is a really important thing to ask for. It's basically a few pages, you know, maybe 2 to 4 pages of a copy edit. It's really hard to do a sample developmental edit because you would need to read a lot more of the book first, and it would eat up a lot of time. It wouldn't really be, it just wouldn't make a lot of sense, but you can definitely get a sample copy edit. And some editors offer them for free. Others, you know, they would charge a minimal amount for their services. So just inquire about that. And if you get one done, it's a good way to get a feel for that editor's style and see what kinds of things they pick up on, see how they communicate with you. So I just personally think it's a really good idea. Okay, let's talk about your first email to an editor. This is so important, and I can't tell you how many times this gets overlooked. Specify, if you know, specify the type or types of editing desired. Now, if you're not sure what type of editing you want, that is fine. That's perfectly okay. The editor can talk to you more about that and give recommendations. But most editors, I think, they do describe the types of editing on their websites. I know I do on mine. And so a lot of authors do know ahead of time what kinds of editing they want. So when you're first emailing an editor, tell them if you want copy editing, developmental editing, both, whatever. It really helps them because they need to know that. Include the total exact word count. Now, not every editor charges per word, so this may not matter to all of them, but I think most would appreciate knowing the exact word count that they're going to be dealing with. And a lot of editors do charge per word, so they need to know exactly how many words are in your book or your document. Other important information, add whether you have a book or a different type of document, like if you need a website edited, a resume. If you do have a book, mention whether it's fiction or nonfiction. Really just give as much information as you can up front. That'll be really helpful. Also include your timeline in mind if you have one. So let's say that you are not quite finished writing. That's okay. You can still email an editor if before you're finished writing, that's fine. But try to give them a heads up of when you think you'll be done. And if you have a specific month, let's say that you want the editing process to start, let them know that. Or if you have a deadline in mind, like sometimes authors will have agreements with printing companies that they need to meet. And so the editing will have to be done by a certain date. And that's really important for the editor to know upfront. Also, this would be a good time to inquire about a sample edit if you're interested. And remember, that's copy editing only. Can't really do it with a developmental edit. This is really important for you as the writer. Ask what is covered in an edit and how the process works. I know we went over, the general editing process, but it's important to know from your editor exactly what is involved in their process in case it differs a little bit. So you want to make sure that you're on the same page. So definitely ask what they cover in an edit and what that process is like. So here's some ways to make it an ideal process. This one's so important, in my opinion. Learn Microsoft Word's track changes. I have another slide that I will show you in a bit that shows you an example of track changes, just in case you're not familiar with it. But every editor that I know of uses track changes in Word when they edit. There's a little bit of a learning curve maybe, but it's pretty user-friendly in my opinion. It basically shows every change that is done in a document. It shows you what's inserted, what's deleted, so you can see every single thing that was done. Very important. Also, like I mentioned, your editor is going to ask you at some point for your entire manuscript. And even if you're just sending them a sample up front, it's best to format your manuscript to industry standards. And the font name can vary a little bit. You know, some choose, some publishers like Pedigree, some like Times New Roman, but typically the industry standard for a page or for a document is going to be double spaced always. And then Times New Roman, 12-point font, 1-inch margins. It'll really help your editor if you already have your manuscript formatted like that ahead of time. Next, plan ahead, because editors do often book in advance, sometimes several months in advance. So like I mentioned, it's fine to contact an editor before you're even finished writing your book or your document, but just keep in mind that they might be booked up a few months in advance. So just be prepared for that. Also, consider requesting a style sheet. Now, I am still going to show you an example of a style sheet a little bit later on. It might be the next slide, actually. Not every editor will automatically produce a style sheet, but I do think they're important, and it can really benefit you as the author. All right, next, this is just a personal thing, ask multiple questions in one email instead of sending several separate emails. It can be really easy to lose an email here or there. We do get a lot of emails from writers, and so if you can, ask your questions at once in one email, it would be appreciated. Okay, here's an example of track changes. As mentioned, it is in Word. It's under the Review tab. So you see right here in the middle, this is the main text. This is a book, let's say. And you see in this right margin, you can see what's been deleted. And I also left some comments, things like that. It really shows every single thing that was done, so the author can easily follow along and see what the editor has done. Next, here is part of an example of a style sheet. And I realize it's probably hard to read, but like I mentioned, I will gladly email you this presentation. And if you'd even like an additional document, I have a Word doc that is a sample style sheet. I would be glad to send you that as well. So you can see over here on the left, I listed my sources that I used when editing the book. And these are words also on the left that I either had to look up or I just wanted to make a note of for myself, so I would be consistent throughout the whole book. And then on this right page, I listed how I treat things like numbers, dates, time, things like that. All right. And a while back, I surveyed several of my fellow editors and asked them for some tips for writers. And here's what I got. Try to trust that our decisions don't come lightly, but come from extensive experience and education. That's definitely true. We don't make a change for no reason. It does come based on our years of experience and education and what we truly believe is the best thing to do for your book. But as mentioned, you can always ask questions as well. Such as here, keep a dialogue going. We want to know your thoughts. Your editor should be happy to talk to you about your book and answer any questions that you have. Be receptive. Again, we only change what we truly believe needs it. Give our corrections and suggestions time to process, or control your inner Hulk. Now, what I mean by that is when you get a book or a document back and it's been edited, it might look like it's been bled all over. You might see, you know, the red from track changes everywhere, and it might be a bit of a shock at first. So just give it a little time. If you start to get overwhelmed, maybe put it aside. It's understandable. We understand that it can come as a bit of a shock, but just give it some time to process. This one is so important. Do not make any changes to your manuscript once your editor has it. So don't rewrite anything and then resubmit new content. That makes me want to pull out my hair. Because your editor will have already started working on your book, will have made progress in it. And then if you decide, oh wait, I want to just change a little something over here in my version of the doc, and then I'm just going to send that to my editor, and the editor's going to have to start all over or find your changes and then incorporate them into the editor's version, and it's going to be a mess, honestly. It's a real pain. So just try your best to not make any changes once you've handed over your document to the editor. Okay. This one's pretty obvious, but you know, be respectful of our schedules and duties to other clients as well. Editors are typically juggling multiple clients at once, and you know, if you were to, I know it's kind of out there, but if you were to email us at midnight, you know, don't get mad if we haven't responded by 2 a.m. I mean, I don't know anyone who would do that, but you never know. Editors are pretty busy, and we do have to work with multiple clients at once. Ask questions. Find out how we came to decisions, and also learn during the process and improve your craft. I personally really enjoy teaching while I edit. So I like to explain not every change that I made, because that would take forever, but some of the more common issues that I found in a document, I will explain, okay, here's what I've been seeing a lot of, and here's why I made this change. And you know, you can always, it's always good to learn. So keep an open mind. And here's just something something funny that I laughed a little too hard at when I read it. Can y'all read it?
Uh-huh.
Okay. And that is it. I will go back to my contact information in case any of y'all want to reach out. Feel free to email me anytime. I have an Editor Amy Facebook page as well. I have a website. I'd be happy to talk to you about any questions you may have. And that is it for my presentation. Do y'all have any questions right now?
We've got actually a number of questions in the chat. So first I want to say thank you, because this is a lot of information and a really easy to understand kind of package. And thank you so much for offering to do the PowerPoint for people as well, and the style sheet. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the first question. There was an answer inside the chat, but I just wanted to go ahead and run this by you. Is it better to use an in-house publishing editor or freelance editor for novels? If one finds a publishing house, does the publisher normally want to use their in-house editor, or does your agent find you an editor?
If you are using like a traditional publishing company, they are going to have their own contacts. So they're going to have their own editors that they'll choose.
Okay. The second question actually has to do with the industry standards for the manuscript formatting. And the question is essentially, do you insert a paragraph beginning?
What?
I think they mean tabs. I think they're asking if they should be doing tabs in their manuscript. Jan, correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, like indenting?
I believe so.
Yeah, I'm very new to all of this, and I tend to write in blocks with no indents and an empty line between paragraphs. So I'm trying to adjust my mind towards industry standards. And so one thing I wondered about is, do you have to indent? How many spaces? Or is it a half an inch? Or, you know, it's kind of a picky, specific question, but like I said, I'm kind of new to this.
Okay. I think that honestly can vary depending on what style guide you might be referencing, but I believe the Chicago Manual of Style says yes, indent, just use one tab and not leave a blank line between paragraphs.
So you kind of faded in and out, but what I got was indent one tab, don't put in the blank lines between paragraphs.
Yes.
Yes. And is one tab like an inch, or does it depend on your computer?
I want to say a tab is consistent Word. I'm not sure exactly how.
In Word, or maybe it's half an inch, I think.
I wouldn't go in and update your standard settings. I know you're asking Amy, but in general,
yeah,
like if you just press tab, it should be good. But if you go in there and start doing stuff, it can be hard for the formatter to figure out what the changes were. And so,
so basically, don't touch anything. Use your tab key. Stop putting a blank line in between paragraphs.
And let me throw this out there as well, just that you know, if you're talking about on the spectrum of genre to literary, you can definitely on the literary side. We had author Mark Haber in here last week talking about his book. That was essentially one long unbroken paragraph. And,
oh yeah, okay.
you know, the thing is, there's no indentation, there's no nothing. He just goes. But the deal is, he brought it to somebody with the expectation, you know, like, this is how I'm putting it together. But you get a lot more leeway on that in a literary environment or with publishing.
Okay.
Than you do on genre. And that goes through self-publishing as well, because your reader expectations are going to be dictated by what that mindset is. If you do a fantasy novel, you indent, you know, like full stop. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. But there is some leeway. And let me ask you this as well, which is, looking at your style sheet was awesome, but I wrote down a little note for myself of, I should write a style sheet now of my work in progress, because of some words that are fake slang or things like that I want to be kept in there. So sometimes it's good to come to an editor with your own style sheet.
Sure. I would be open to that.
Especially with science fiction and fantasy where you're making things up. I definitely suggest having a word bank, essentially. We do have some more questions in the chat, but I forgot to add. I forgot to add, if anybody does have questions, please go ahead and add them, and then we'll go ahead and ask Amy. So going on, I think Jan's question got answered. That was a really good point, Sean, about spelling. One of the things that I did notice that I thought was really important too, before I go on to the next questions, brand names, generally speaking, should, because they have trademarks, be set as that trademark. And so when you looked at her style sheet, she had Band-Aid, that kind of thing. Well, if you don't want that in your story, if you're writing fiction and you don't want Band-Aid to be randomly, you know, capitalized in the middle of a sentence, you want to go ahead and try to communicate with your editor about what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do in that regard. But seeing it there, you know, in a list of, I've got these words and I want them spelled this way, or I want the English version of gray or the American version of gray, that kind of thing. If you don't want the editor to change those, you already have that particular mindset about those, go ahead and let them know ahead of time. But going on to the next questions, Julie's got a couple of really good questions. Can you speak more about certificates? How long are the courses, in person or online? And then do you have any highly recommended ones?
Oh, sure. I have, let's see. I have a list somewhere. I would be happy to send you if you would like. They really vary. All the ones that I know of are online. I personally did one through the University of Chicago They have a Graham School for some continuing education or something like that. And my certificate program was 2 years, but I know that there are shorter ones as well. Some are 1 year. And I want to say there's one by the Pointer Institute. That one is, I don't know, a few months maybe. But there are definitely several really good ones. And if you'll give me your email address, or shoot me an email, I'd be happy to send you the list of the ones that I recommend.
ACES, which used to stand for the American Copy Editors Society, but I don't think it does anymore. They also have 2 certificate programs that you can check into. One of them is a little bit more in depth than the other one. Second question, is the Chicago Manual of Style your preferred style manual? And if so, why? And if not, what is?
Yes, that is my absolute favorite one. It is my Bible. I got so geeked out when the 17th edition came out. I took a nerdy picture of me kissing it, and the Chicago Manual of Style people actually liked my picture, and so I got extra geeked out about that. I find it to be the most comprehensive. It is massive. It's, I think 1,100 or 1,400 pages. It's really big. It's bigger than the AP style guide, and it's to me it's the most general style guide. AP is more for journalism, but Chicago can be used for I would say almost anything, and it's like I said, it's just really comprehensive. What about you, Shannon?
I always use CMOS, although I remember now we've been calling it the wrong thing. It's CMOS.
Yeah.
I was like, what? All right, anyway, but CMOS or CMS or CMOS, sometimes people will call it different things, but the Chicago Manual of Style is pretty much the standard unless you're working with an in-house guide for both indie publishing and professional press publishing. So if you are trying to become a copy editor or a proofreader, I would definitely suggest either, getting a subscription to that post-haste, or at the very least, finding a short sort of education module that you can go through and figure out how to use it, because it is a reference book, and if you're not used to reference books, it can be kind of hard to get into at first. It doesn't read like page 1, the beginning, but it's integral to make sure that you look like you've got a polished professional manuscript to go through and use that as your guide, both for the formatting and for even your table of contents, everything like that. So word nerd, yes, CMOS or CMOS.
I found something on Amazon. You probably can't see that very well. It's a little cheat sheet for the Chicago Manual of Style. It's like a fold out that is only a few pages. Of course, it's tiny print, but that would be something good to use to get started, to get your to dip your toes in the water with Chicago. Let's see, you might want to check that out. I found it on Amazon. It's only $7, and the book itself I think is what, $40.
Right now it's $40 because it's marked down. That's the physical book. I can't remember how much the online subscription costs off the top of my head. I got it like 2 years ago, and the extended one. But I think it's a little bit more than that per year. But the physical book is cool if you like to be able to put little markers on there for things that you go to on a regular basis. Yep, sticky tabs.
Let me throw this out there as well, because the Chicago Style of Manual, as well as other style manuals are an often thrift store find. So $1, $2, something like that, because a ton of people go to college and then never use that sucker again. So you can find secondhand copies quite easily. I have passed over a ton.
Good to know.
Yeah, at this point, because it came out, I think about 3 years ago, the 17th edition, you probably could find things used. All right, so we have a couple more questions. If a novel has foreign language words, not made up foreign languages like Elvish, in Romanized English script, does one need to find an editor who's familiar with the foreign language used, or will any editor do?
I mean, and it's a legitimate language, you said?
That's what it sounds like, because there are so many sci-fi. She went ahead and put in there that it's a real language. So say it's French. Say it's French.
Right. I mean, if you can, I think that would be a benefit, but I don't think it's absolutely critical, in my opinion. What do you think, Shannon?
If you're asking to make sure the translated, if you've put in something from Google Translate and you want to make sure it looks legitimate in that language, you probably need to get somebody who is fluent. But that kind of fact checking is not usually part of a standard copy edit, at least to my knowledge. Now, there are editors who will do fact checking, but you just want to make sure that that is included in your contract, because that can vary widely. But if you are trying to make sure that your language looks legitimate, and that the words are in the right order, and that this sounds like somebody who's fluent actually said them, you're going to want a translator as well.
Yeah.
However, generally speaking, you'll set a style. Either you'll use the standard that CMOS has set forward for how to handle foreign languages inside of the manuscript text, or you'll together select a different style if for whatever reason you don't want to go with the standard. And it should be the same across all of those foreign words. But again, if you're trying to make sure that you didn't actually write like "where the glove find 6-7" by accident when you're trying to write something different in French, you want to find an actual native speaker to check through and make sure it looks right.
Yeah, if you're talking actual translation, then yeah, that would be good.
Paige just tossed this on the chat, but I was wanting to toss this in, which is a sensitivity reader, which are often out there for a lot of things, including sexuality, disability, stuff like that. There are many for cultural things, and that might be a place to find someone who is familiar with the culture, fluent with a language that would be willing and interested in doing something similar, but what can I say? In the case of just a section, or just a couple of sections, that are that, you wouldn't be asking said person to sensitivity read the entire thing. It would be the sections, and I tell you what, that'll bring the price down a lot.
People are kind of going in and putting some information about sensitivity readers in the chat. Paige, I know, does sensitivity reading. I'm not sure if she does foreign language reading or not, but she can add that. I have not hired somebody to do translation. However, I've had clients who've had foreign languages in their books, and I'm kind of hesitant to do this, but the ones that I've talked to actually found their translators on Fiverr. So you could check that for translation. But as far as sensitivity reads, I think the Editorial Freelancers Association actually allows you to search for sensitivity readers now inside of their oh my goodness, there's an entire list of editors, and you can search.
Yeah, the directory.
Thank you. I couldn't think of the word directory. But you can check there. And then I believe, word of mouth is always good, because then to trust them. And there's probably Facebook groups that are specific to sensitivity readers as well, for that kind of thing. So I know we're talking about two different circumstances, both translation and sensitivity readers, but go ahead and check the EFA. Those are editors who also do sensitivity reads, or you can also do word of mouth. One of the things that I wanted to ask, I know it's kind of different because this is me being a devil's advocate since I'm both an editor and a writer. What are some pet peeves as an editor that you have that clients may not realize they're doing that might be a faux pas? And you did kind of talk about changing the manuscript after the edit has begun, but are there any other things that people they do because they are excited, or they just don't realize that what they've done is the incorrect way to approach something?
It is a pet peeve of mine when a potential client is first contacting me and they try to tell me how long it should take me to edit something. They might say, oh, my neighbor has already edited this, so you won't find much wrong with it. Or, you know, I'm a retired teacher, I've already edited my own work, it shouldn't take you very long. Well, they really can't determine that for me. And it's, I don't know, that's just always kind of gotten under my skin when someone, yeah. I'm kind of drawing a blank on anything else. I mean, really submitting new versions of the same document while I'm editing, that's really the biggest one. What about you?
That's a big one. I stopped working in Google Docs specifically because a client had gone in and started changing things after I had done one round, but not before I did the other. And Google Docs doesn't allow for track changes the same way. And
Right.
the worst thing I think that they could have done, they did, which was to share it out to their friends who are also writers who went in and were simultaneously making changes. So we couldn't go back and track. We could not go back and track who had done what. So there were all these things that were copy edits that I had essentially put in line edits that weren't accepted, but the entire manuscript was different than it had been. So we couldn't just go to where I had finished, because he had started making changes that were more on the line level, so at his buddies. And so it was one of those things that was so hairy. And of course, this was something that he was just eager. He was like, hey, look, my editor did my thing. Let's check it out. And here, buddies, are like, oh, we'll just come in and fix this. And oh, I think you should write it like this instead. But because this is something that's between us two, and other people are now in there putting their own, content in, it means that I don't know what he's actually, addressed and what he hasn't. I don't know what's new. I don't know what hasn't been done. And so going from something that is supposed to be a second round edit, which would be just focusing in on those problem areas that we had already established, it would be a brand new edit because there's so much changed. And so I think it's hard to kind of comprehend that we can't just go be like, oh, okay, well, this is the paragraph here, that's a paragraph here, unless we know specifically that's what it is. I've got to look at this as if it's a brand new manuscript. And so that was a debacle. And I know editors who will simply say, you actually need to pay me for a brand new round. Like, this is outside the scope of our practice that, we both agreed to in writing, because in actuality, that's what it was. And so it doesn't seem like it would be a big deal. You're like, oh, I just added some things. But if you are going to add stuff, make sure that you do it inside of track changes. And for the love of God, don't let other people into your file and change stuff.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that's the worst case scenario. Other pet peeves, there's some red flags, and actually for the local EFA group, we just recently talked about red flags for clients. There's certain things that can make you look aggressive or can make it appear that you would not be a good person to work with. And like Amy said, telling us how long it'll take if you don't have a background in editing, or even if you do, you can easily be blind to your own content and what the content needs. And so it looks kind of controlling if you're going to tell us how long it's going to take us. And it also looks like you may be a little bit too sensitive to receive feedback yet. And that's something that I think a lot of new authors, they are sensitive. This is their baby. It is your baby. But if you're not ready to have somebody go through and look at it and even just tell you that you should change the way you format wouldn't, for whatever reason, if you use the wrong commas, or you've used like dumb quotes or dumb quotation marks instead of smart quotation marks or what have you, then if you're already showing that you would be upset even if we address that, and then it makes it look like we probably shouldn't work with you. So if you're noticing that editors are already declining, there might be something in the way that you're going about getting an editor that you might want to go through and look at your communication style. Not that I've had that a whole lot, but I have had a couple of people who have kind of like red flags everywhere. And I'll be like, I'm not the one for you.
Yeah, exactly.
So a couple other things. So in the process, Warren, I think there was can you rewrite that? I'm not sure what that says. I do have a couple other questions. You know, at what point do you bring money in? Should the clients pay you up front before the process starts, at the end, multiple times, you know, in sections? What should they look for in an editor as far as the payments go?
Okay, that's a very good question. That is going to depend on the editor, but what I prefer and what I know a lot of other editors prefer is at least a partial payment up front. I'm pretty flexible with whether they want to pay a fourth, a third, a half, whatever. But typically I'll do thirds, thirds or halves, like maybe a third up front before any editing is done, and then a third either halfway through or when I have delivered the finished manuscript, and then the remaining third after, let's say there's a revision involved, like when the author has to do some rewrites and gets done with that, and then I edit that. So really it'll depend on the editor, but be prepared to make multiple payments. Yeah, that's something that's definitely important to talk about. And if they have you sign an agreement, that should definitely be spelled out in their agreement.
Yes. Warren's got a question for us. How do you contract for short stories? I have 20 plus short stories, about 40,000 words total.
What do you mean? How do I contract them?
I think it means, you know, is there anything different about getting an editor for short stories versus long form fiction?
Oh, okay. Not for me anyway. I do my rating a little bit differently. Like with novels, I typically charge per word or in a range. But with shorter novels or shorter books, documents, things like that, I charge hourly. So it really just depends on the editor. But to me, the process is essentially the same.
Warren, did that answer your question? I might need you to just go ahead and ask her. I'm not sure.
Is there a minimum, you know, because I'm totally new to this, so I don't know what to expect. So,
no, there's no minimum. We can edit anything. You don't have to have a certain number of words.
I mean, but at some point it becomes, there's some practicality to, don't want to send you a 2-page document.
You can. I've edited really short things. I've edited 1-paragraph emails before. Really right.
That was going to be my joke. Like oh, you edited an email. That was going to be a joke, and it happens.
Sorry.
Yeah, I made a typo on the first thing I put in the chat too.
No worries, that's what we're here for. I do know some editors who they'll charge a little bit more for shorter content because they're taking into account like the amount of time that they're going to be communicating back and forth. And so, you know, if I spend an hour or 2 hours, you know, in communications, getting everything set up, then I still have to build that in. So not necessarily, but just depends. Like I do have some clients that routinely will send me short stories, and we've already got like a running contract that's good for the year, just so we don't have to do it again. And so, but other editors I know, they put like a little bit of a increase in their rate because they're still going to be putting an X number of time into the short story plus whatever that other padding is. So just check with the editor. But I mean, if you're like, I'm going to send you 40,000 words to copy edit and I want it to use the same exact style for every single one of them, then that's like a regular size book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The other part is the should I say the quality of the writing, could be different with different short stories. If I pick one and send to you, it might be pretty well edited and you base your rate on that, and then pull another one up and you go, oh my God. That's really the issue I see, you know. That's
when just charging a flat hourly rate comes in handy. you know, so if I have to spend a little more time on a certain short story, you know, that's really built into the rate.
And so, Amy, I want to ask one other question that hasn't come up, but I think is really important, especially since if you're going to go the indie route or you're a small press, we've got a couple of people who are publishers in here. If you were to go hire an editor, you kind of said things that were highlights of good editors. What are some red flags from the client side where they should go, I'm not sure if this person actually has the chops that they say they do? What are some red flags that they should check out?
Yeah, that is a good question. I would say, I don't want to say if they don't have a website, because they could just be getting started, but if they don't have anything that they can show you, that would be a red flag to me. Even if, say, they're brand new, they don't have a website running yet, they should be able to show you something, some kind of samples, or have some kind of testimonials from someone, but ideally have a good website. And if you spot errors in an editor's website, that's obviously a big red flag. If they do not want to sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, I think that would be a red flag. If they, I'm trying to think. There's something, I know I'm missing something. What am I missing?
I'm gonna add a couple things that I think are really important. If they don't have a contract, then that's a big red flag. I know some editors don't do contracts for smaller things like your short stories, but in general, the contract is there to protect us both, because it defines timelines, it defines the actual service you're getting, and then also, you know, what to do if something goes wrong. They call it a kill clause, which I think is very scary, but, you know, say something traumatic happens in your life and you can't go through with publishing your book. It's good to have, you know, have knowledge of what it is that you're supposed to do. I wouldn't trust an editor that wants you to pay them through a non-professional means. If they want you to Facebook them money, that's, you know, that's really, it's iffy, because Facebook is not a professional transaction, whereas PayPal is, or if they tell you to send it as a friend instead of as a business transaction, that's, you know, that's some shady stuff as far as their business things go. Because yes, PayPal takes out more, but it's a protection issue too, because PayPal also arbitrate if there is, you know, disagreement between a professional transaction and a friend-to-friend transaction. So those are two things that I would look at where I've seen people get taken in. I haven't used wire transfer, but from my understanding, a lot of the wire transfer companies are changing their stuff so that there is a more oversight and control over that, but I could be wrong. But if it doesn't look like, you know, if they're like Venmo, Venmo me money, but don't say anything about why, and just give me cash, essentially, that would frighten me off a little bit. If I'm bad at texting on my phone, certainly, but if they don't present themselves as speaking and writing in English very well, which I've also seen, I would worry about them doing a copy edit. What Amy said, if you can't find a track record, or, you know, say they are brand new. For instance, we have a proofreader who essentially asked if they could, you know, share that they're trying to get clients and testimonials for their brand new proofreading business, and we allowed her to do it on Houston Independent Authors. I think 4 or 5 people contacted her, and one of them's already given a gushing review. So it doesn't take that long if you do a good job for people to tell you that you've done a good job. And if you can't find anybody who said that they're good, I would scare me away, because I mean, if you can't get a hey, great job for a free service, it means you really didn't quite know what you're doing. And for those of you who are trying to get into this, I definitely would suggest check out the local Editorial Freelancers Association. Amy and I head it up right now. And we do, is it quarterly? We're every 3 months. How often do we do our meetings?
Oh, every other month.
Every other month. I should know, I'm sorry. But you can meet other editors. You can find out, you know, what they've done to make sure that they're, you know, on top of their game, and kind of emulate from the people who have already been there. But if if you're not sure about an editor, definitely go ahead and check out other ones just to see if they communicate better with you. I definitely suggest interviewing at least 3 before you pick just one.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? We are a little bit past time, but I do want to allow you guys to ask if you have anything else. Awesome, thank you, Kathy. Kathy just left us a note.
Oh, hi, it's Jan again. Could you put the editor website in again?
The Editorial Freelancers Association.
Yeah, whichever thing you, Shannon and Amy are heading up, blah, blah. Well, you just mentioned it, and I know you put it in before, but I didn't write it down.
Okay.
Thanks.
So if you're looking for our specific Editorial Freelancers Association local chapter, you'll have to look for local chapters here, and it'll tell you when we have our next event up. We're actually going to have one at the end of September. We're going to be playing a game. So Amy, you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's called STET, which if you are familiar with editing, that means basically let it stand. It is a game for grammar geeks, essentially, where I will read off a card and you will have to tell me if there's anything wrong with it or if it is fine as is. And the first person to, get the correct answer wins that round. And then, we do several of them, and then we'll have prizes at the end. And it's
gonna be some word nerd fun. That's like we're gonna kind of dork out to words. I want to go ahead and give Amy a virtual round of applause because this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. I do have people's email addresses if they put them into the chat, and I'm gonna go ahead and check it again after the fact so that we can make sure Amy's got all your email addresses. If you do have any questions, her information is up here on the screen. Again, next week we'll be talking about haiku and how to help it, or how it can help you be more creative. But for now, thank you guys all for coming. If you're not already following Houston Independent Authors, you can find our Facebook home at Houston Authors. And then you can also find Amy there as well at Editor Amy. Thank you again so much. If everybody wants to say bye, thank you.
Hi guys, thanks for letting me come.